Good evening. My name is Rick Kite. I'm the director of the D.B. Reinhart Institute for Ethics and Leadership, and we're delighted that you came here to join us for this event this evening. Let's start with a poem by Robert Frost. It's called A Prayer in Spring. Oh, give us pleasure in the flowers today, and give us not to think so far away as the uncertain harvest. Keep us here, all simply in the springing of the year. Oh, give us pleasure in the orchard white, like nothing else by day, like ghosts by night, and make us happy in the happy bees, the swarm dilating round the perfect trees. And make us happy in the darting bird that suddenly above the bees is heard, that meteor that thrust in with needle bill and off a blossom in midair stands still. For this is love, and nothing else is love, the which it is reserved for God above to sanctify to what far ends he will, but which it only needs that we fulfill. Amen. This is the 5th year that we've hosted speakers to talk to us about the Holocaust, and we're really grateful to the collaboration we've had over that period of time with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. This year we have, again for the 5th year in a row now, Stephen Feinberg, who is the director of the National Outreach for the Holocaust Museum. Steve, would you please stand up? Steve tells us that he doesn't often make even consecutive visits to one location. He gets so many requests, but he's come here 5 years in a row, which tells you either something about his delight in being here or our need to have him, one or the other. Thank you, Steve. And we also have Jordan Allen, who is the lead representative of visitor services for the Holocaust Memorial Museum. We also have, for the 5th year in a row, Muriel Rostad, who was at 16 years old, joined the French Resistance, ran away from home in Belgium, joined the French Resistance, and spoke here 5 years ago and told her story. Muriel, would you please stand up and be welcomed by this crowd? Thank you. What we've been doing with this series in the past few years is coupling the evening event, this lecture series, with an all-day workshop for teachers, middle school and high school teachers who are teaching lessons of the Holocaust. We have 28 teachers this year, and most of the teachers over there. Would you please stand up from around the upper Midwest? Please stand up and be welcomed by this crowd. And we have Bill Younglove from Cal State Long Beach. He's an expert on Holocaust literature, and he's traveled here to be part of this workshop and add a little something new to the workshop this year. Thank you, Bill, for joining us. The idea for this series and a lot of the work in organizing it and keeping up the connections, doing a lot of the work, letting all of you know about the event, and also letting teachers know about this and organizing the workshop has been done by Daryl Klott. And she's going to be doing the introduction for our speaker this evening in a little bit, but I'd also like to give a round of applause to Daryl for doing all this work. Thank you, Daryl. Now, one thing I just found out about this afternoon is the Viterbo Honors Program is going to be hosting a fundraiser to provide some funding for this Holocaust education program that we do each year. Jordan Murray, one of our honors students on campus, has been organizing this event. It's going to be a Trivial Pursuit tournament. It's going to take place Sunday, April 11th at 1:00 p.m. And all of you are invited to register and join this, be part of the tournament. If you're interested in getting more information about that, you can just email the Institute at ethics@viterbo.edu. and we will get you the details about that, that Trivial Pursuit tournament. I also want to say just a couple words about some upcoming speakers. We didn't print enough bulletins for everybody. Didn't realize that we were going to have another capacity crowd. I should have known that, but didn't. Oftentimes when we have such beautiful weather, it keeps people outside and they don't want to come back inside for an event. But this is amazing that so many of you turned out for this event. But since some of you don't have bulletins, let me just mention that we have 2 more events coming up this spring. One of them is on April 15th by David James Duncan. Duncan is a remarkable essayist and novelist from Lolo, Montana. He's known mostly for the novels The River Wye and The Brothers Kay. He's going to be speaking on nature and world wisdom traditions, and that's on April 15th. And then on April 22nd, Bill Miller, who's the Native American composer and songwriter, is going to be speaking here in celebration of Earth Day. That's on April 22nd, and the talk is going to be at noon. And I just want to make clear, he's not giving a concert. Now, he will play the flute, but it's just a bit of music, and then he's giving a talk entitled Sacred Ground. And that is also a free event at noon on April 22nd. You notice a lot of kids coming into the auditorium tonight. Can I ask you, if you are in elementary school or middle school or high school, would you stand up so we can see how many students we have here in the audience tonight? And how many college students do we have here this evening? Could you please stand up also? Thank you for coming to this event. You have to understand that you're the reason that we host a program like this. I got several calls this week from parents asking what is the appropriate age to bring somebody to a talk by a Holocaust survivor. How young is too young to come and hear one of these stories, these incredibly heartbreaking and moving and ultimately hopeful stories? And I don't know. I never know what to say in answer to that question. How young is too young to have your heart broken? Mother Teresa used to say a prayer, God, may you break my heart so completely that the whole world falls into it. But we do these events at an age where we think that you're still vulnerable to having your heart opened and shaping your life in response to that openness, to the plight of people in the world. Before your heart calcifies and your attitudes become shaped and fixed. So we're doing this for you, and I hope that you keep that in your mind as you're listening to the program tonight, that how significant this is. There was a report that came out this week from the Southern Poverty and Law Center. They do an annual report keeping track of extremist groups, hate groups, militias. There's been a steady rise throughout this decade of hate groups in the nation. In this year, 2009, there's been, I think it's close to a 300% increase in the number of militias. Groups like, it was a militia that remembered the Oklahoma City bombing was done by militia. And there's a real concern about these kinds of groups. There's 8 identified hate groups in Wisconsin. One of them is in La Crosse, I think it's called Firm 22. Every community can have groups like this in its midst. And it's something that doesn't just happen far away, and it doesn't just happen way in the past. It's something that we're always looking out for. And it's something that the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is keenly aware of and understands that this message about the Holocaust is a contemporary message for how we respond to the world today. And so before we introduce our speaker, we're going to watch a 5-minute video called The Power of Truth from the Holocaust Memorial Museum.
There's no way to explain, and it will not go away. One of the hardest things for me to this day is to talk about this right in this boxcar. The boxcar they loaded us onto, they had to push us in, and the door locked. There's no food and no water. Babies are crying, the mothers are crying, and the babies are dying from lack of food and lack of air. And your own grandfather dies in this compartment, going to Auschwitz concentration camp with you.
Że tu bocznica szła.
Aha,
To tu, tędy.
Pani go odstawił.
Odstawiłem, bo się pana Żydów wysadzili. Ja wagony zabrałem i muzyka się urwała.
Every single day, we are losing some aspect of the authentic voice of the Holocaust, whether it's the loss of the survivors, the other eyewitnesses, or the deterioration of the material every single day.
There's been a tremendous growth in Holocaust denial while survivors are here to tell the story. What happens when they're gone? There has got to be tangible evidence that this happened.
If you think that in archives materials are always well kept, you're wrong. Paper deteriorates, there's water damage.
We are in a race against time every single day.
We work at the State Archive in Berlin, and we inventoried and safeguarded the one and only documentation of a Nazi court from 1933 to 1945. 7 million pages. That is one of many projects we are working on in Germany, but also in Europe. And our goal is to make materials available that have never been available for researchers. All the collections that we are bringing to Washington give us a new and much deeper knowledge of the Holocaust. And this is really our core mission.
Last year, we reached over 24 million people, and most of them are not walking through our doors. Hate lives today on the internet, and we're reaching people all over the world on the internet, where our problems are globalized, and so are our opportunities.
He who hates one group hates all groups. He who hates one minority hates all minorities. Wherever and whenever a project even similar or close to similar to that project that Hitler had for the Jews and some other people, we must immediately do whatever we can to stop it.
The world we live in today calls for being bold.
I am very grateful to the U.S. Holocaust Museum and the American Academy of Diplomacy and the U.S. Institute of Peace, because I think it is a very interesting and important combination of talents.
One of the objectives of the Genocide Prevention Task Force is to get the prevention of mass violence, mass atrocities, and genocide on the president's own agenda. The most hoped for result of the task force is more preventive action.
We have extraordinary partnerships all over the world. Today's technology has truly enabled us to reach the entire world instantaneously.
Our newest project is called World as Witness. We try to profile both stories of courage and stories of reality, and try to find that balance between helping people understand what they can do, but also reminding us all of what's really happening.
And you wonder today, why did someone not stand up? Why did our community not stand up? We were their neighbors. How could they turn their heads on us? How could they turn their hearts so hard that they didn't see and they didn't care?
I have taken ethics courses for 26 years now as a prosecutor and have never been touched or impacted in the way that the lessons of the Holocaust impacted me. The program begins with the Nazi rise to power and chronicles the role of law enforcement and prosecutors and now judges in allowing the Holocaust to happen. By the time I had finished the course, I went from believing that the Holocaust had nothing to do with me and my role as Yavapai County attorney to knowing that the Holocaust has everything to do with my role as county attorney, with my role as a prosecutor, and with me as a person. By the time I flew out from Washington, D.C. the next day and made it back to Prescott, Arizona, I was already thinking, I want all the prosecutors in Arizona to have the advantage of this course.
One of the greatest lessons of the museum is not to be a bystander. That when you see things going wrong, it is your duty to speak out in some capacity to stop that type of injustice.
It'll happen again and again and again unless the rest of us stop it.
We must push ourselves constantly to be bigger than we think we can be.
We have such a powerful opportunity at the museum to make a difference. If we don't do it, no one else will.
Good evening. I love that. I am Daryl Klott, and I have the very best job on the face of the earth. I am a teacher, and I'm very proud to say that I am a Holocaust educator. As Rick said, we have very special guests in our audience tonight who are part of our Holocaust Educator Workshop, which will take place at Viterbo tomorrow. Teachers, on behalf of Viterbo, I want to thank you for the important work that you are doing in our schools by educating young people about what happens when they do not accept other people's differences. Our schools have the responsibility to guide our young people to be aware of events that are happening on the world stage today and to teach our students that each of them has the power to make a difference. I'm thrilled to see so many of you in the audience tonight, for you are about to touch history. You will hear about the past from one who lived it. Ultimately, it is only through remembering and reflecting that we can gain an understanding of the past. The age of Holocaust survivors is drawing to a close. Before long, there will be no one left to say, I was there, I saw what happened, I remember. All that will be left will be books of literature, history, and research, pictures and films, and a multitude of testimony. Today, the last living survivors of the Holocaust are leaving us one by one, just like the World War II veterans. We in the La Crosse area are fortunate to have had the opportunity to hear many Holocaust survivors, and also a person who worked in the resistance against the Nazis, stand on this stage and tell their inspirational stories. Many of you will remember hearing Nessie Godin, Mary Rosted, Gerda Weissman-Klein, Sabina Ziemering, Ellie Wiesel, Henry Greenbaum, Inga Auerbacher, Manja Friedman, and tonight, Marty Weiss will share his story of survival. Soon, history will speak about Auschwitz with the impersonal voice of researchers and novelists at best, and at worst, in the voice of deniers who call the Nazi final solution a myth. The fury of the Haitian earthquake, which has taken more than 200,000 lives, teaches us how cruel nature can be to man. The Holocaust, which threatened to destroy a people, teaches us that nature, even if in its cruelest form and moments, is kind in comparison to man when he loses his moral compass and sense of reason. Marty Weiss suffered enormously during the Holocaust, and he could have responded with anger and hatred, but instead he responded with extraordinary compassion for humanity. History is about to come alive for us. It is my privilege to introduce Mr. Marty Weiss.
Good evening. After all this introduction, I don't know what I'm going to say, but first I would like to thank Dr. Rick Kite for having me come here, and Daryl, Claude for arranging the whole thing. And of course I have to give credit to her husband that he helps her, and he's involved as much as she is. But I'm honored and really full of humility to come here before you. There's so many people here, I cannot believe it. But it just shows you that we in the United States show our fiber, that we as a people care. And that is really important. If the people in Europe would have cared, I wouldn't be here right now talking to you. And when Hitler started out, he more or less said that he could do with the Jews whatever he wants to, and nobody will come to their aid, nobody cares. And to show you, as much as people think he was crazy, he was also a very clever politician. And he knew how much he could do, and when he saw he could get away with it, he just continued on. He pushed the envelope. I would also like to make a point that as I speak to you, I would like to know you to know one thing, that I'm completely convinced that each one of us matters. It's what you do matters, and what we all do matters. If you see an injustice to somebody, the thing is to do is stand up instead of letting it go by like it's not my business. Anyway, I'll start with my testimony. When the war broke out, I was actually 9 years old, and when it hit, by the way, I come from Czechoslovakia at that time. It hasn't been Czechoslovakia for a long time, but at the time it was Czechoslovakia. When Germany made a move, he took the Czech Republic. Germany also had allies, so he gave some parts in payment for the Hungarians because they joined the Axis powers. Some he gave to Romanians. Some he gave to any country that was Bulgarians and so on. He went down the list. They all participated in the crimes of World War II. Very often when we talk about Nazism and atrocities, we only think of the Germans. Well, I would like to change that a little bit and inform you that other countries, whether it was the Hungarians or the Romanians, different countries, their troops and those people were committing the same type of atrocities one way or another as the Nazis. And I think it's high time that history should correct that a little bit. Anyway, I was 9 years old when the war broke out, and the Czech Republic was taken by the Germany, and our partner, I lived in the Carpathian section of Europe, and that past east of Slovakia, to be exact. And we were occupied by Hungary. As soon as the Hungarians came in, they started adopting the Nuremberg laws that the Germans erected against Jews. That meant that the Jews lost their civil rights. They took away their businesses. They humiliated them. And by the way, it's very easy to have a victim. If once you humiliate them, for the person doesn't feel any guilt doing anything to him, because once you're humiliated, he looks at you like you're less than a dog. And once that is in their head, that's why the Nazis were so successful in doing that, because they figured out by humiliating the person, you weren't just a person anymore. So by killing you, it was no big deal. And you'd be surprised how, by educating the people to do this, how easily it gets done. And I don't have to prove it because history speaks by itself. As they took away our civil rights, and by the way, I must also emphasize that Czechoslovakia was a democracy. And even though I was very young, to put it simply, when the war broke out, I was just going into 5th grade. We were in 3rd grade already. When we went to Czech schools, we learned about democracy. We learned how people, the president was elected and all that. So it just shows you. So by the time I was 9 years old, believe it or not, I already knew about democracy. And the contrast for the Hungarians was vast. At first, my parents weren't too worried about it because my father served in World War I under the Hungarian-Austria Empire. And he said, oh, they weren't so bad. They were anti-Semitic, but it was not so terrible. So we figured they're not going to be any worse. But he was very wrong. By 1940, they inducted all military-age men, Jewish men, to the army from 19 or 20 to about 45. But they didn't induct them into the army because politically they were undesirable. So they were in civilian clothes or under army jurisdiction. And by doing that, they used them for slave labor. They call them labor battalions. And they shipped them all over on the Russian front, and they had them chop down forests so the partisans couldn't hide. They had them go, like my brothers were actually on the Russian front throughout the war, and they had to bury the dead, they had to pick minefields, and all those type of jobs. And because they were under military jurisdiction, if any one of them escaped, guess what they did? The next morning they took all the people, put them out on a parade ground, and they counted up 1, 2, 3, up to 10. Every 10 person was shot. You can imagine that anyone that wanted to escape did not escape because their conscience would have bothered them. They were responsible for having one of their friends killed. And being all Jewish, and we were all, actually, everybody was Orthodox, very, how can I put it, observant. Everybody was brought up with the same ethics, that you don't sacrifice, or you don't cause someone to lose his life. So unfortunately, most of them didn't escape, and they stayed. But as time went on, it got worse. But a lot of them, when they went up to the Russian front, had a chance to escape to the Russians. And once they were in Russia, they joined the Czechoslovakian Legion, or sometimes the Russian Army, or the underground, and they came back as, as liberators. At home, I had one older brother. Somehow he escaped the draft. They didn't bother him. So luckily, because my father had a business and a farm, and I was only like going 10, 12 years old by that time. So I was his helper, and we did all the work on the farm and our business. But there again, we had neighbors. We got along very fine for years. We never had any problem. We lived in a mixed society. We went to school together. But believe it or not, when the Hungarians, and by the way, they were Slavs, they were Ukrainian or Russian. Now they're called Ukrainians, but they were called Russian then. Even though we had the same enemy, politically, the Hungarians or the Germans looked at them as less than human because they were Slavs, and they were not, they didn't look at them as equal to a human being, but they were good for slave labor. So they abused them as well. But believe it or not, because of anti-Semitism, we could not trust them, okay? Because you never knew who was going to give you up to the police. So whatever we did, if we tried to help someone on a run or get some food to them, we had to be extremely, extremely careful. In fact, I had 2 little sisters, so my mother used to pack a bag, and that nobody would notice 2 little girls walking with a package to get some food to them, because they were on a run. So it gives you an idea. And I'm not even condemning those people, but for a long time I did for a while in the beginning, because they were not worldly, to say the least. And I don't know if they would have reported us to the police or not. The fact is we could not trust our own neighbors, and that is a terrible way to live, okay? In 1942, 43, we kept on hearing through the grapevine there were big atrocities taken care in Poland and Ukraine. And the atrocities were so enormous that we believed it because it came first, like, through good information, but we could not believe it. I mean, it's contradictory, but I know, but you just could not, even though I was very young, I knew everything what was going on, even the treaties they had signed. But we could not, believe it for a simple reason, because the Germany was, by the way, the most, how can I put it, in Europe at that time, Germany was the most progressive nation. They were first in science, they were first in education, they were first in music, they were just top, in Europe they were considered top. Now, how could a country that is so educated and so intelligent be so mean and miserable? But we kept on hearing these stories. So then we heard stories that in Poland there were incidents. They took people, put them on a truck, and they with a canvas over the top, and they piped in the exhaust into the back of the truck, and they drove around the city of Warsaw till they died. We heard that again. It was unbelievable. Then we heard stories about the Einsatzgruppen going from town to town in Lithuania and Ukraine, especially Ukraine and different places, and rounding up Jews from a town, take them out to the fields, and they would have them dig their own mass graves and just kill them all. While all this was going on, and we heard it, but in the meantime, we, like I say, we believe it, but there's not much you could do. Unlike the United States, we didn't have weapons, we didn't have cars. It was a big plus. If you did something, they would shoot your whole family or something. So everybody, we didn't do anything, we couldn't do much. In the meantime, what the Hungarians did to copy the Germans, they went to different towns and they picked up select people. Most of the time they were very poor. They, believe it or not, took sheets like a bed sheet or a tablecloth, put some utensils in there, stuff for the family. They would pick them up, give them 2 hours to pack. They would pick them up, put them on boxcars, and take them out to the Ukraine, near the Russian front. Now, one thing I will tell you, during World War II, it just so happened by coincidence, the winters were very severe. First of all, that part of Europe was very, very cold. We had a lot of snow. Probably not much different than Wisconsin. The only difference was that our snow started like in November, and sometimes we had snow as late as April. So we had a very cold, there was a very cold area, Eastern Europe. So they picked up these people, like I say, from our area, and they shipped them out in these boxcars. They took them out to the Ukraine, and the Ukraine is a very vast country, and they have a lot of forests. They took them out into one of those forests. They would unload them in the snow, and they would let them loose. They didn't kill them right away in some cases. They let them loose. Now you have to remember, these people were poorly dressed, had no food. They had lots of small children, because in Europe at that time people had anywhere from 3 to 12 children. So a lot of them had like you had children from 10 and 10 on down. You had 6 kids, and they were let loose, and they started walking from place to place. And one thing, the Ukrainians were very, very anti-Semitic, extremely so. And plus, a lot of them were Nazi collaborators, a lot of them. In fact, many of them joined the Nazi army. And I'm not talking about a few, I'm talking about by the thousand. So that means their families were also pro-Nazi. But because they were under Russian, they're basically Russian people, they couldn't be very open about it. But then some of them actually, after wandering in the forest, made it back, and we heard the stories directly from them. However, most of them would be wandering from place to place. Now, in wartime, when you have an area near the front, wherever you have a crossroad or you have a bridge, there are sentries. And the Hungarian, that was the Hungarian area I'm talking about now, not even the German, although they did the same thing. Many of them came across those areas where they were guarded by the Hungarian troops. And the stories we were getting back is that they, and by the way, these stories were very reliable. I had one of my cousins was stationed there in the Hungarian Labor Battalion, and he came home. He was able to come home for a few days. And he told us he recognized one of our own neighbors. There was a Hungarian army. He was a sergeant. He committed those crimes as well. And what they were doing, there was a river there called the Dniester River. And they were taking, like I say, every mother had a couple of children. They would take the children from the mother, and I hate to do this because we have young people here, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And they would take the child, rip it away from her, and bash them against a stone, and then throw them into the river. And while the mother was pleading, only then did he throw in the mother. Now, after hearing stories like this, we were prepared for just about anything. However, like I say, we were helpless. Plus, everybody had families. Whom do you sacrifice? Do you run away in the woods? How long are you going to last? We lived in, like I say, in cold climates and so on. So we decided to stick it out. So while we heard all these stories going on, we realized more and more that we were in big danger. So my father was thinking of going into the woods with my brother and me. Then that means we'd leave all the women home. I had two small younger sisters. So then we debated to give our sisters to one of our neighbors, which they would have probably taken them. However, we couldn't trust, because one of their neighbors would go and point them out to the police. Then the two kids would be taken away by themselves. So you were in a position that was very, very hard to make a choice. No choice was good. So consequently, we didn't do anything, and we waited. Finally, in 1944, early 1944, they came out with an edict. Oh, by the way, before that, we had to wear a yellow star. We had a curfew. We were, like I said, it took away all the businesses from everybody. People couldn't even make a living. One day they came out that everybody, the next day they're going to pick us up and arrest us. So everybody was arrested, put into a school. They accumulated all the people from the area. And to show you how far they went, I had an uncle, he had TB, he was in a sanitarium, he was literally dying. They picked him up on a stretcher and brought him over, and he died as soon as he came to the ghetto. What I'm trying to say, they didn't allow anybody to fall behind or left behind. And these were not Germans, these were Hungarians, okay? And the reason I'm pointing this out, because I could give you the same story about Lithuania, Latvia, all those countries that were involved with Germany were all guilty of the same thing. A lot of the guards in a gas chamber or in the concentration camps, well, even though I came from the Ukraine, they were not all from Germany. And after the war, they said they were forced, they were volunteers, take my word for it, from Lithuania. And by the way, those are the ones that were some of the worst guards. Some of them, many of them worked actually in the gas chambers. They threw in the cyclone beef to kill the people. So it gives you an idea that the Germans alone did not do this. When they picked us up and they collected us in the school from all the area, like I say, not a single person was left behind. They took us to a city, they put us in they had a couple of big brick factories, and all of a sudden we found ourselves really hopeless. We found ourselves in a position, we were sleeping in the sort of a warehouse that kept bricks, but it was raining in and it was windy, and even though it was the spring of the year, but it was cold and no food. So we were there, they kept us there only, we were lucky, only 4 or 5 weeks lucky. Because people in Poland, they were in ghettos which were worse than we were. And they were there for 3 to 4 years in a ghetto. So it actually, we had a short duration. And one day we got an order that we're going on a transport. Now again, we knew we were going in for big trouble. But as much as we heard of all these atrocities, we just could not believe it. They put us on a train, and because there were so many, and by the way, in 2 months, the Hungarian police picked up 600,000 people from Hungary, 600,000 in 2 months. That's logistically almost impossible. But because they were such a willing, cooperative people, they did it in 2 months. They put us on a train, 125 to 135 people in a boxcar. You can imagine. No food, no water, no facilities, but old, young, babies. And as soon as we came into the boxcar, everybody was crying and holding on to their babies and whatever. And this was the duration to the trip to Auschwitz. Thank you. When we got to Auschwitz, we happened to come during the night. It was about 12, maybe 1 o'clock in the morning. And the minute they opened the door, it was like bedlam hit. It was something that, if someone would describe hell in the worst possible way, you could not quite describe it the way it was. One of the things that happened, first of all, they came in with some men in striped uniforms came in with sticks, and they started shouting, "Raus, raus, schnell," and started beating everybody. Now, those guys, we found out later, were capos. And by the way, they were other prisoners, but it was their job to get us moving. And if not, they dealt with them very harshly. They would shoot them or beat them. So they did it, and they were not allowed to talk to us. We were unloaded, and there was floodlights all around our area. And all of a sudden, there were guards with police dogs, and they had rifles with their finger on a trigger. And I often wonder why they needed that, because we were surrounded by barbed wire, actually electric barbed wire. But they still had the guards there, and all of a sudden they started shouting, men on one side, women on the other side. They were separating everybody, and of course everybody was holding on to their kids or their families. They didn't want to break up. And the one thing the Germans wanted to do, make sure that all the families are broken up regardless. So they took the women on one side, then they had to go to a line of selection, and there was an officer standing, and he would just go like this and like this. That means if you went to the right, you went to work. If you went to the left, you went to your death, except you didn't know. The same thing on the men's side. So before we got off the train, we were talking about the Germans all wanted us to work. They were against people, the intelligentsia. They were hated people that had education. So we're all going to say that we were workers, we were farmers. So I was not very big. I was, like I said, just about 15. And I took off, I took about 3 jackets, put them on, and when my father and brother went through, I followed them, and somehow I went through. But again, we didn't know exactly what was coming ahead of us. So while we were waiting there in a group, just a short space between us, I noticed my mother and my 2 little sisters were standing on one side. So I said to my father, you know, I'm going to run across that empty space, and I'm going to help them to get food or whatever, because my little sisters were younger, and they wouldn't be capable of doing it. I'll be better at it. So I tried to make a dash across this space. Along comes one of these guys in a striped clothes with a stick, and he grabs me by my shirt and just throws me back. He says, "You can't go there." Very nasty. And I came back to my father. Could you imagine? I found out later the guy was a Polish Jew, and I said, another Jewish person, how could he do that? Well, guess what? The next morning, I found out why he did it. He threw me back, and I went back to my father. And again, they tried to separate us, so my brother was immediately, he was a very strong, healthy guy. He was immediately separated from us. But from there, we went to a shower. Before we went into the shower, they showed all our hairs off. From the grown men, they actually shaved their body hair off. And that was supposedly to prevent lice. However, later on, when we were in the camp for just for a little while, we were so full of lice that you would not believe it, like the whole time. We went into the showers, we came out on the other side, we got the striped uniforms. Now we knew that other prisoners, that's why you wore striped uniforms. And we came out on the other side, and we couldn't even recognize each other. They marched us to a barrack, and we came to the barrack, and the barrack was I think they used to keep horses there or something. Anyway, it was built a certain way, and there were bunks. We had to go up on the bunks. They were, frankly, I thought they were much taller, because now I realized I was younger. I thought it was 4 bunks in height, and now when I see the museum, it's only 3. But it just shows you how, because I was younger, it just seemed very tall, very high up. 12 people per bunk. And the minute they blew a whistle about 5 in the morning, you had to jump out of the bunk, rush outside, and by now they gave us those striped uniforms, which by the way had the weight of pajamas. Now you have to remember, this was in the spring of the year, and this was in Poland. It was so raw and cold. It was like, I can't explain it, foggy. You couldn't see a bird fly. You couldn't see anything. It was just very miserable. It was it was like made for the occasion. And so by the time we came to the barracks, it was about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, it was dawn. We saw this big fire a few hundred yards away from us under the pine trees, but the flames were really going high into the sky. And we were wondering what it was. Finally, we found out that the crematoriums, and by the way, we saw the crematoriums. Now before that, I never heard of the word crematorium. It was never used in our society. All these chimneys were spewing out black smoke, and you could smell actually the flesh burning. But these fires, a few hundred feet away in the open, we found out that crematoriums could not burn enough bodies for the 24-hour shift that they had to use outside. Now at that time, they were getting rid of 12,000 people a day. Okay, 10 to 12,000 people a day. You can imagine what a job that was. Like I say, the next morning we found out that all our families were already on the smoke. Okay, you can imagine the feeling we got. Now it's a very curious thing that happened right then and there. It happened to me, and I'm sure it happened to everybody else. Nobody ever spoke about it. We never we never talked about our feelings. You just went numb. From there on in, it was a matter of just survival. You go into a certain mode, and that was it. I never remember anybody even complaining, or I remember I didn't cry, nothing. You just went into a certain mode. And from there on in, it was a matter of making it from one day to the other. But I was also lucky here. I didn't stay in Auschwitz too long. I was only there about a week, maybe a little, maybe 10 days. And we got orders to go on a shipment. This time we went to Austria. Now we knew we were going westward. Nobody told us where we were going, but we came over the Danube. and the train stopped there, so we could see, we recognized the Danube, and mainly from pictures, and we saw Vienna not far off. But each particular place we stopped, we thought they're going to kill us. We just figured if they killed everybody else, why were not going to kill us? But anyway, the train continued on, and we came to a place called, which we didn't know at the time. It was a huge mountain, and the tracks were right alongside the mountain. We disembarked, and they marched us up to the top of the mountain. We came to the mountain top, and there was a big sign, Arbeit macht frei, which is work makes you free. And then they would the name of the camp was Mauthausen. Now, all of a sudden, it took on a new meaning. But this time here, instead of being cold like it was in Poland and miserable, here the sun was bright and hot. It was all early like in the spring, but late in the spring actually. Just the opposite. Again, they had us stay in the barracks during the night. In the morning, we had to run out very quickly, otherwise you were hit with a stick. And we would stay out in the hot sun from morning till night. No water, no nothing. Finally, when they gave us the food, it was a little piece of bread and a little, they were using a sugar beet they used to use for cattle, and they made like a tea out of it. And they used to give us that. Then later on, we were getting some food once we started working. But while we were in Mauthausen, just to show you, it was so punishing being in the heat that I, believe it or not, the first few days I got an infection in my eyes, which lasted throughout the time I was in camp. And when I say an infection, in the morning or even during the day, I had to constantly wash my eyes because they would stick together. I couldn't open them. And it took me 2-3 years after the war to get rid of that. But in Mauthausen, again, I could go into details, but I'm not going to because it takes too much time. But then we got orders, we got a number, by the way, we also got an emblem why you were there. Actually, we had political. And I must say, Mauthausen was a camp. It wasn't, so far I was talking about the Jews, which happened in Auschwitz. But Mauthausen was a camp, it was mixed. There was every country that the Germans were in were represented there. And I'm talking about Ukrainians, Poles, Czechs, you name it. I mean, every country that Greeks, Italians, they were there. But from Mauthausen, they shipped us out to a small camp. It was a sub-camp. By the way, Mauthausen was so big, they had 40 sub-camps. Now, this Melk, once again, was a beautiful little town in Austria, but the camp was established there, and we had to go to work actually one of the major reasons it was there, we were working in tunnels under a big mountain, and these tunnels were, they were trying to put all the factories under the mountain so that the Allies couldn't bomb them because all their factories were being bombed constantly. So they were really pushing it very, very hard. So we had to work 3 shifts and constantly and very hard. And people were dying daily because it was exhausting. It was so exhaustive. But just to give you an idea, when we got to Melk, for the sake of time, I'll just give one day a life of the camp. You went to work. If you were on a morning shift, you started out like 5 o'clock in the morning, and you were lucky you came back like about 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, or something like that. But in the meantime, you had to go by a train. So in the winter, again, the train was high up on a field, and they built a trestle way, way high up. So when it was windy or cold, like during the winter, which we had these flimsy pajamas on, if you will, and we were standing there, we had to stand at attention. You were not allowed to touch anyone. You were not allowed to talk to anyone. And we were going like this every single day back and forth to work. When you came back from work, God forbid they should let you rest. Most of the time they found some reason you had to get a haircut because they always were talking about not having lice. So every week you had to stand in line for 2-3 hours to get a haircut and so on. So there were a lot of different things like this. The food they gave us was in the morning, again, they gave you a little of that tea, if you want to call it, with a chunk of bread, which was very good, and we tried to really ration our bread so it lasts for a whole day. And for lunch, they would bring out, if you were out at work, they would bring out kettles of sort of a soup, but it was made out of dehydrated vegetables, but very smelly, very ugly smell. But when you're hungry, believe it or not, you eat. And then during the summer months, they had, for our diet, they had spinach soup every single day. Now mind you, we were in a very bad physical condition. So believe it or not, when I started having spinach soup, like for 2-3 weeks in a row, a lot of people had dysentery and they died, just like that. So we had a very, very big death rate all the time. So every month, because so many people came into Auschwitz at that time, they brought in, the population, by the way, was about 13,000 in our camp. Every month, they brought in a replacement for about 3,000 to 4,000 people because they died. Not because they wanted more people, just to keep the numbers up, because they needed a certain amount of workforce. And there were so many things happening, it's too much to go into, but if you worked on a night shift, by the way, we worked with cement, so we had paper bags. And like I mentioned, it was very windy and cold. So some people went and they put those bags from the cement under their jacket to keep like a windbreaker. The lager commandant would come in, like if you came in a night shift, he loved to do this at night. You came in a night shift, 2 o'clock in the morning. He would stand at the gate while they would count you in to make sure nobody's missing. He would have the guards examine you, and if you find anyone with those paper bags under the jacket, you just earn 25 lashes. But I'm not talking about lashes of any kind. These were special group of people, a small group, and for some reason they were Spanish. I don't know why. And they had beautiful tailored uniforms, prison uniforms, with the marking that they were from Spain. And they were ironed, they were clean, well-fed, and they had what they call well, it's a bullwhip actually, but very, very powerful like this here. And they would give the guy 25 lashes, and this was his excitement. And he would do this every so often, just surprise, okay? So it gives you an idea what life was about. I could go into different directions, but you get the idea. Anyway, from there, as life went on there, like I said, my father was there right away, and I had an uncle there, and also I had a cousin. My cousin was in the same barrack I was. Now, it just so happened that he was lucky. The capo picked him to be an orderly. So he too had it pretty good. He didn't go to work. He had a nice, clean uniform. He was able to keep clean. He ate better. But the ones that went out to work like I did, we really were taken on the chin every single day. But my cousin also, if he had a little extra piece of bread, he would help me out and so on. But this went out. By the way, he had a brother there. He died there. He just was too weak, I guess. And then one day we got orders. By the way, by now we were hearing that the Russians, oh, just to give you a little incident about luck. I had, I worked the night shift, and I was supposed to rest in the morning, to sleep. But they needed somebody, so extra bodies for some detail. And I was picked, so I had to go on the detail in spite that I was supposed to sleep in the barracks. So I went out on the detail, and this was a good detail. It was outside of camp, and it was sort of a farm area. And I don't remember what we were doing there, cleaning the stones from the grass or something. It was spring of the year. And while we were there, about 2-3 miles away from the camp, there was the English came in with a bombing mission, and they made a mistake. They thought it was an ammunition depot instead of a concentration camp, and they dropped, I can't remember exactly how many bombs, about 15 bombs, I think, if I remember. And all the people that worked the night shift, they were sleeping, were all burned. They were killed right there on the thing. Some mistake. It seems the British didn't update information or their intelligence. So that was one lucky escape. Another one I worked in these tunnels, and I worked the night shift, and in the morning, we quit by about 8 o'clock. So in the morning, about just a little before 8, like 7:30 or so, I had to go to the latrine, so I walked out of the tunnel, and while I went there, and I came back, which was like a few minutes, all of a sudden, by the time I returned, there was this black smoke coming out of the tunnel. One of those big BX cables caught on fire. And the whole tunnel filled with smoke within a couple of minutes. So again, like about 75 people died just like that. Some of them were lucky. We had conveyor belts were taking out the sand. Some of them dropped on a conveyor belt and it brought them out. So it just shows you how precarious life was. And nobody lost a minute because of so many people got killed. It was no big deal. Anyway, to move forward from, as we kept on hearing, the Russians were in Hungary and they were coming closer. And naturally, when Americans were coming in to bomb, by the way, American planes used to come every day at a certain time, 12 o'clock noon, like clockwork. 40, 50 big planes coming in the air. Believe me, it was just, we cheered like anything. One time, this cousin of mine that was he was upstairs, he cheered, and the guard saw that. He just took a rifle and shot at him. So luckily he didn't kill him, but he was shot on his arm, and one bullet hit the brick, and it ricocheted, so he had 2 wounds from one bullet, actually. But just gives you an idea how life was. Anyway, we were ordered to go back to Mauthausen. We came back to Mauthausen, and by the way, while we were in Melk, I emphasized there were people from every country of Europe. Like I say, a lot of Poles, Italians, Greeks, what do you call it? Just about from any country that the Germans occupy. But anyway, we came back to Mauthausen, and here we got scared again. They separated all the Jews, and they took the Jewish people. They took out from the camp, and they put us alongside of the mountain. It was full of thorns, a very abandoned type, very nasty place. You couldn't even sit down any place. But this time we were sort of like skeletons. We were weak. We could hardly stand up. Because they separated us, we figured, they're going to kill us. Now already we were waiting to be really killed. Because if they separate, why else would they do this? Okay? Because in the other camp, we were treated equal. We were all treated the same. So after we were there a certain amount of time, I can't remember exactly how long, all of a sudden one day we get this order, we're going on a march. Then rumors spread around that the Americans and the Germans are having some kind of they're trying to work out some details. They want trucks from the Americans, and they're going to trade us for the trucks. Now, by that time we were realistic. I said, who in the heck is going to care about us and give trucks to the enemy? Nobody's going to care. And so we just heard it and we believed it, but we did not believe it. So here we were on a march for about 3 to 4 days across Austria, and we ended up in a place called Gunskirchen, which is outside Linz. And until this day, I don't know why they had us march, but they didn't do it only to us. All the people that you talked to that were in camp at that time, wherever they were, they marched them somewhere else. But there also, we heard rumors, the reason they did that, because they were afraid to be caught by the Russians, they wanted to be caught by the Americans, okay? So I don't know what was true, but anyway, whatever it was, but we went on a march. And to give you an idea, the march was very, very hard, because like I say, most of us by that time were on our last leg. And there was an incident, for instance, while we were walking, one of the fellows spotted a potato on the street, on the ground, and he died for it. And another fellow saw the same potato, and he died for it. And they started fighting over the potato. And the guard by the way, this was not SS, this was a Wehrmacht, regular army. They just took the rifle and shot him right in the face. Now, when you see this every single day, you don't realize that your life is not worth much. Finally, we reached our destination, and we came to to Gunskirchen. And in Gunskirchen, this was in a forest. There were only a few barracks. So guess what? There were 5,000 people per barrack. 5,000 people in a barrack. In fact, I thought it was so exaggerated that, believe it or not, last year, I had someone check it at the Holocaust Museum if that was possible. Because I thought maybe I made a mistake. Guess what? They did some research and they said, yeah, it was 5,000 people in the barrack. So there again, by this time, we hardly got any of this broth, and the bread was not bread, actually, even before that. It was crumbs, which, by the way, most of it was made out of sawdust, but it was full of mildew, and it was crumbs like this. You had to hold out your palm of your hand to get a few of those crumbs. That's the only food you got, and you got it once a day. Some people were so weak they couldn't even, by the time they got online, there was no food, nothing left. One thing I will point out to you, there were SS there. I remember there was one SS man, tall guy. He had a couple of German police dogs, black, nasty dogs. He would get up on a stoop, and he would just, once in a while, just for kicks, he would stick the dog on a prisoner and just let him rip. And he thought it was funny. He would laugh. And when you see meanness like this, it makes you wonder if you belong to the same human race. I can't emphasize enough, this is something that's been bothering me all my life. That as human beings, how could we have a right to call ourselves human beings if there are people like this among us? This is something that is really very hard to understand or contemplate. But in this place, like I say, things were very bad, and people were dying left and right. And to give you a good example how bad things were, there were puddles because it was raining, it was in a forest, and there were puddles, and some people would walk in to the puddle and they'd fall down. And they were so weak they couldn't get up. And they would sort of reach out with their hand for help. And believe it or not, we would walk by and not even bother. Now you say to yourself, even in those conditions, how could you do this? How could you pass by? Would you believe we envy the guy that he's not going to live long, he's finished, he doesn't have to worry anymore, okay? I know this sounds bizarre, but believe me, at the time, that's how you thought. This is very hard to, even for me to explain it. But all of a sudden, one day, we got word that the Americans are there. We are liberated. And guess what? Oh, by the way, when I came to Gunskirchen, I was separated from my cousin and Melk. And when I came to Gunskirchen, who do you think I ran into? But his brother, he was in a Hungarian labor battalion. And he was in Gunskirchen. As soon as I got there, I ran into him. Okay? Now, mind you about luck. And he was in pretty good shape. He had a couple of friends. They had civilian clothes. They had blankets. They had boots. But we didn't have any of that stuff. So he was a big help for me because already, you all of a sudden, I got a little more confidence that, I could manage. And we found out that we were liberated. But guess what? We stayed in the camp a whole night, an extra night, because we were afraid to walk out. We thought it was a trick that they'll have machine guns lined up, and as we walk out, they'll just mow us down. So that's how we didn't trust anything we heard, okay? Because rumors are rumors. And so the next day we found out that the guards were gone. We found out that our regular guards ran off, but they replaced them with other guards. And the captain that was replaced, he had orders to shoot us. But guess what he did? He took a couple of people from our camp, a couple elders, and he went out to meet the Americans, and he showed them he had orders to shoot us, but he's a good guy, he didn't do it. So it gives you an idea that we were not exaggerating. Anyway, we found out, next day we walked out of the camp. The first thing we did, we're looking for food because everybody was starved. So everybody spread out all over the place. So we found a abandoned train army train with canned goods like Spam, canned liverwurst, that kind of stuff. We broke into the train and we were able to get those cans. We started carrying them, but we were so weak we couldn't even carry them. We had no can opener, but somehow we opened up one can of liverwurst. I don't remember exactly what we used, but we opened it up. And I remember tasting the leberwurst, and leberwurst, if you know, was made, especially in Germany at that time, all fat and just, you eat this when you were in our condition, it's committing suicide. And I smelled it, and I remember tasting a little bit of it, and believe it or not, I could not eat it, okay? And that saved my life again. So because they were hard to carry, we needed food, so we threw them away because there was no point, it was too heavy. So before you know it, we go a little further down the field, we saw this truck sort of in a ditch. There was also an army truck, and we found this big tub of lard, open front seat. And one of the guys, like I said, they were in fairly good shape. He just took his fist, went right to the glass and on the window, on the door, and all the glass fell into this tub of lard. But we wanted the lard because it had something to do with food. We didn't know why we wanted it. We couldn't eat lard. But we took it on the grass, scooped out all the glass, and took the lard with us. In the meantime, we looked in the back of the truck, we found leather hides. Now, these leather hides were already refined, and we got all excited. Oh, we could go to a shoemaker and have shoes made, because after the war, there were no shoes in Europe. Nobody had shoes. And we needed shoes. So each one took several of those hides, as much as we could carry, and we're marching. We saw this farmhouse not far away, and we come to the farmhouse, and you have to remember, we were so bitter and so angry about Nazis and Germans. To us, every German was a Nazi and every Nazi was a German. There was no distinction. I mean, I didn't have to look at anything else. That we were ready to commit murder if necessary. We were just that, you know, at least I thought we were, very bad, mean spirit. We came to the house, and this is something, by the way, when I started speaking some years ago, I forgot about this story entirely, but the last 2-3 years I remembered it and I started using it, and I'll tell you why. We came to the door without any consulting or anything. We knocked on the door. The lady came to the door. She opened the door a crack because she was afraid. And one of the fellows asked her to give us some eggs and flour if she had, and she obliged. We went, and then we never went into the house. We never barged in. But she had a barn, and in front of the barn was a kettle, you know, like you see in the movies, the cowboys use for heat up water, a big kettle. We got some water. One of the fellas took the lard and the eggs and the flour, mixed up and made dumplings. And we cooked dumplings. That was our first meal. Unfortunately, one of the fellas actually met up an uncle of his. He was a little older. He was like in probably low 50s. And he ate a little too much, and he died a day or two later. But the point I want to make to you is this. While we were so angry, and we were so felt such a nastiness in us and all this, after we finished eating, one of the fellows suggests, you know, we should take some of these hides and give it to the lady in payment. Nobody said a word. We all peeled off some hides, and we took it back to her door and gave it to her. And like I say, when I started speaking for the museum, I never thought of that as a story. Then all of a sudden one day it hit me. And until this day, I have a hard time understanding that why we behaved so morally and ethically. I cannot, for the life of me, I could tell you today, oh, because we were nice guys and all this. Baloney, we were mad, okay? Yet, without any talking, without anything at all, we all agreed to do the same thing. It was, and this is something I always like to say it in the front of the public, especially for young people, to show you that no matter how dehumanized we were, and we were dehumanized, by the way, we didn't feel like human beings at all. We still acted like human beings, okay? So at least to me, that's a good lesson for me, and I'd like to hear the young people hear that. I'll just read a small thing. In closing, I would like to thank you all for being here and listen to my testimony. It is very important that the deniers of the Holocaust don't succeed. The 6 million that were murdered, 1.5 million of them children, in the most brutal fashion by one of the most modern and enlightened countries at a time that gave us famous philosophers, scientists, were also capable of the most dastardly acts in history. All the men, women, and children killed have no gravesite markers. Instead, we have the Holocaust Memorial Museum of Washington, D.C. that serves as a living memorial and is used as a teaching tool to stop bigotry and hate. Even today, there are groups and countries that teach hate to children, often in the name of religion. No wonder we have terrorists and suicide bombers. In Hebrew scriptures, there's a saying, Tikkun Olam, repair the world. I'm very proud, as all of us should be, that the U.S. Memorial Museum exists and educates people from all over to repair the world. And you people are an example of that. Thank you very much.
Yes, they are.
Thank you so much, Marty. What a treat. Oh, we're going to have a question and answer period now. This is your chance to ask a living, breathing Holocaust survivor questions. Yes. Okay, the question, Marty, is what happened to your father?
My father was in the same camp I was. However, I didn't see him too often because he was on one side of the camp and I was on different, plus we had different shifts. But once in a while we would get together and just say hello. That's about all I think we could do, but it wasn't too often. Then one day I found out he died. So again, he died, I didn't even cry. Sounds funny.
Right here? Marty, do you have the numbers on your arm?
No, I don't. I didn't stay in Auschwitz long enough. I had on a bracelet, like on a wire. So like, I had a number like that.
Yes. What was it like to integrate yourself back into a normal life after the Holocaust ended?
That's a good question. I don't remember. I can't explain it. It's like you put one foot in the front of the other. It was just a matter of trying to survive. To put it simply, when we were liberated, the first thing I wanted to do was go home. A lot of people stayed in Germany or Austria. I wanted to go home and find whoever survived because I knew I had big brothers and sisters. I figured they would come home before. If I made it, they would make it, okay? So I hightailed home. I really didn't have any plans, and when I went back, here again, luck has everything. I did go back immediately instead of staying around. I came to, somehow I got, it wasn't that simple because the tracks were bombed out, the bridges were bombed out. So when you got on a train, you had to get off, get on the other side. Hopefully another train came. But anyway, I got home to the city in my area, big city. Now mind you, this is a big city railroad station. And I walk in, I was 16 years old. When I was, it took about 3 weeks actually from liberation till I did that. And in the meantime, I got very sick when the Americans set up camp. But the last 2 weeks, I was able to eat a little bit, so I got some strength back. So the first thing I wanted to do was go home. A lot of people didn't do that. They decided to stay. So I went home because I was looking for somebody from my family. And I came into the railroad station. Mind you, this is a large city station. And I ran into someone, I have no idea who it was. so I remember everything, and this is something I don't remember. It bothers me. That he told me my brother had escaped from the Hungarian labor battalion, and he already set up housekeeping in a different city, different town where I lived, because he was married there, so he had a house there. So he went back over there. He didn't go to our home where we lived. And so when I heard that, I changed my mind right away. I broke off from my cousin, and I went my direction to find my brother, and I did find him right away. And he was already a little set up, so first thing, at least I had food. He was very able, capable, and he was able to get food. So for the first month or so, all I did is try to get my strength back. And I ate all kind of stuff that like a lot of bacon stuff. So go ahead.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? Let's see. Yes, in the red?
Why did you immigrate to the U.S.?
Wait, why did he immigrate to the U.S.?
Yeah, why did he decide to come here
Yeah.
instead of staying there?
Why did you decide to come to the United States instead
That was
of staying
easy.
there?
Believe it or not, I wasn't anxious to come to the U.S. This may sound surprised. But I had a sister here. My sister left for the United States 2 weeks before we were occupied by the Hungarians, okay? So she was here in the United States, and I had another older sister came back, and somehow she found out her address, and we got in touch with her, and she started working on we had to have an affidavit to come to the United States. So we had some rich relative here in New York, and she was able to get us affidavits. So we started working on papers immediately to come out here. So as a result, because she was going, and we were anxious to get together as a family, so I came to the United States as well. And that's how I came to the United States, very quickly, by the way.
Great. Yes. Did you know Dr. Mangala?
No, I didn't know him. I saw him, but I didn't know. Nobody knew him. We saw him. He was a very, very mean person. He was the one who made the selection when we went through.
Yes.
How old are you?
How old are you, Marty?
I'm not 100 yet. I'm going there. No, I'm 81.
He only asked that because you're a man. He would never have asked that if you were a woman. Trust me. I'm sure of that. Anybody up there? Questions? Yes. Oh, up in the balcony. Go ahead.
How old were you when you were liberated?
16.
Okay, he was 16 when he was liberated. Can you imagine? Were you ever scared? Were you ever scared, Marty?
I was always scared.
Yes.
What happened to your mother and your two little sisters?
What happened to your mother and your two little sisters?
My mother and two little sisters died in Auschwitz the first night we were there. Not only that, but I had cousins, one set of cousins. There were 7 children, and only one of them made it out of Auschwitz by the next day. All the rest of them all died in Auschwitz the first night. So it just shows you the percentages. To put it simply, I'll just go by, this is not statistical, this is just my own guess from what I know. Like 80% of the people that we went out of Hungary, 600,000, 80% of them died. Let's put it this way. Okay.
Mary? The question is, how long did it take you to get rid of the bad dreams?
I had some bad dreams, but it was not on a regular basis. I had like intermittently, and there were certain type of things, like I remember there was a guard, he was a big bully, like with glasses, big guy, and when you marched, sometimes, I'll be honest with you, we marched, we were so tired, I literally fell asleep walking. I know this sounds silly. So I would step on somebody in front of me, and I remember one time he had a big ladle, like it was like made out of not sheet metal, but iron, like very heavy ladle, like a quart ladle, I think it was. He just took the ladle and hit me right over the head. And believe it or not, I used to dream about him. So you get, but I didn't dream on a regular basis. I had dreams, but I learned about myself that I adopted a certain attitude. I do what I have to do, and that's it. And I didn't even complain or bellyache or complain to anybody ever. Okay. In fact, in the first 50 years in the country, I never spoke about the Holocaust to anybody, period. Not even my children, nobody at all. It's only after we moved to Washington, D.C., I started volunteering. So.
Yes. How does going through something like the Holocaust affect your faith in God?
I knew sooner or later this will come up. Well, I'll tell you, I have to admit, I'm not going to lie to you, I am very moral or ethical type of person, but I'm not exactly what I would call very religious, although I brought my kids up Jewish, my grandchildren are going to Hebrew school and so on. But I myself, I don't try to explain it. I don't blame and I don't accuse. I just, you know, I don't think he had anything to do with it, and it's just that simple. God is not responsible for that. Man is. So this is my only answer I could give you.
Let's see now. Somebody new, right over there. Bob. What did your life evolve into? Would you tell us about your family, please?
Here I'll be more than glad to. I'll tell you, somebody once in a while asked me if I have wanted vengeance. I never did. But this is my vengeance, my family. I'm very lucky. I have a son and a daughter. They're good citizens, they're good kids. They have children of their own. The same thing. I have wonderful grandchildren, and they're good parents. To me, this is all I need. So that satisfies me. And I never had, I don't hate, you ask me if I hate a German, I don't hate anybody. But I learned right early that you do not, matter of fact, I'll even say something. I read a novel not long ago. The guy said something I like to repeat. He says, if you seek vengeance, dig a grave for two. So that gives you an example. But I really have, my kids are my vengeance. They're proof that we count as people, and like I say, I'm very lucky. I have a wonderful family. So.
Right there, yes, upstairs. Okay, the question was, you said there was a lot of anti-Semitism among your neighbors before the war. Did that change when you came home after the war?
No, actually, it probably got worse. And I'll tell you why. But in all fairness to them, okay, I'm not even angry at them. Okay, what it is, I'll tell you. They had an opportunity. All the property that the Jews left, they sooner or later got. And when people in even in the United States, I hate to say it, you'd be surprised how many people are envious. You have something, you leave it, they want it. And once they take something, they don't want you back. But like I explained to you, before the war, we lived there. We got along fine. They were good people. They were hardworking people. They were, we were good neighbors. And this was throughout our whole state, in a sense. Were they anti-Semitic? Yes. And I'll tell you what it is. They were brought up that, that Jews was guilty of this, that they were guilty of killing Christ, and so on. When you teach this to children throughout generations, they're bound not to like you. But at the same time, they were not bad people. They never hurt us. We never, we got along. But after the war, I'll give you a little brief idea of what I'm talking about. I had an uncle that did return from the camp, and while we were living in town, he had a neighbor that was Russian, or you want to call it, now you would be called Ukrainian, but anyway, it doesn't matter. He used to play chess with him every single day practically, for hours. Okay? They were good neighbors. Every time he needed help, he used to come to my uncle for help. My uncle always loaned them money, or whatever the case was. The point is, they were good neighbors. During the war, where we lived, nobody had a radio. My uncle had a radio. And by the way, he didn't have electric, so the radio was run on a car battery. So we used to listen to London, because that's the only place we were able to get information that was believable. If you believed the other information, you couldn't believe it. My uncle allowed this neighbor to come. Every time he listened to London, he would come in and listen to the radio with him. And when my father found out, he told my uncle, don't let him come in, because if the police come and they start to find out that you're listening to London, you'll be arrested, and he'll give you up. So my father accused him of doing it. That was a good neighbor. So my uncle said, nah, you're crazy. He's not going to do that. So they were good neighbors. That's what I'm trying to establish. After the war, my uncle came back. By this time, this guy, I still remember his name, Tatsy Mishka. Okay. He escaped to Russia, and he was a communist. So when he came back, he was a communist, and not only that, but he was on the underground. He was a partisan. So because of that, they appointed a mayor of the town. So he had all the power of the town. When my uncle came back with a couple of my cousins, just a few people, like maybe 5 or 6 people. 5 or 6 people. You know what the first thing he did? He spread the word through the town. Don't sell them any food and don't give them anything, because otherwise they'll stay. Mind you, this is the same guy that played chess with my uncle. Okay? Now that tells you a lot. Was it anti-Semitic? I doubt it. What it was is plain greed, and that's it. That's about the only thing I could say. But see, hearing stories like this, now where we lived it was like this, but in Poland it was much worse. In Poland, their own neighbors in some areas came, they actually killed them when they came back. So it was different. Yes, anybody else?
Okay, yes. From the moment they told you you were free, how long did it take you to actually believe it?
Oh, it didn't take long. Once we saw the Americans, and we went in, frankly, once we saw the Americans, all of a sudden, you know, the weight lifted, if you will. But however, you have to remember, we were also in very, very bad physical conditions, so we didn't dance in the street, if that's what you mean. But, you know.
Fred.
Well,
what was the reaction of the Americans to you and to the people that were with you when they first saw you?
Well, the Americans were actually wonderful. They were like the man on the white horse. I mean, you know, I'll tell you what it is. I remember, you have to remember I was young too. The Americans came in and I still remember the young guys would jump in and out of the Jeep, and they would sometimes have a bar of chocolate. They would throw it to us or something like this. They were like a dream. We didn't think it was real. It was almost like a dream. So as soon as we saw the Americans, naturally we were like, you know, you were just reborn, if you will. Okay, at least you had hope. And the Americans themselves, when they found the camps, frankly, most of them were so astonished. They were like in disbelief, if you will. Okay, what they saw. Because what they saw was mountains of corpses wherever they went. Every camp had, you know, mountains. I'm not talking about a few, I'm talking about mountains. So the Americans had a very rough time with it in the beginning.
See, okay, right there. Next. I'm sorry, yes. For those of you that couldn't hear her, She's just expressing her gratitude to Marty because she's saying all her life she's read about the Holocaust and about the African slave trade, and that she can't talk to somebody that was involved in the African slave trade, but now here you are speaking on behalf of survivors.
Thank you.